Library in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm also a children and teen book reviewer, and I've had the good fortune to serve on many award committees. I'm delighted to spend this time with you and our special guest, Jerry Craft. Once a reluctant reader, Jerry Craft is now a New York Times best-selling and Newbery Medal winning author of the graphic novel New Kid. New Kid also won the Coretta King Award and the Kirkus Prize. His second graphic novel, Class Act, published yesterday. And Craft is also the creator of Mama's Boys, an award-winning comic strip which won the African American Literary Award 5 times. So delighted that he is here to join us. And Jerry, first I want to say congratulations on all the amazing prizes and accolades for New Kid. I know this has been somewhat of an unusual year, but what has been one of your most memorable moments connected to New Kid's success?
Well, definitely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Deborah. It's a pleasure. And I'm thrilled to be doing this event for all the teachers and students as part of Barnes & Noble's Fall Educator Week. So I want to make sure I thanked everyone for that and for showing up. You are absolutely right when you talk about what a crazy year 2020 has been. For me, it started out getting 2 amazing phone calls on January 27th, which was one for the Newbery Medal and one for the Coretta King Award. And from there, I mean, it went from elation to hibernation to concentration to devastation. It's just been all over the place. But I have to say that the fans and the feedback that I've gotten from teachers and students and kids and moms and dads have really made me go through this as positive as could be expected. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, you said you were a reluctant reader when you were young. How does that inform your own writing? And how can teachers and librarians reach those readers?
You know what? So I often try to think about why I was a reluctant reader. And when I hear kids talk about books are boring, I do really empathize because I think I was that person. I read Marvel Comics, but even then, I kind of skipped past the real person part of it and would just kind of read the fight scenes of Spider-Man fighting Kraven the Hunter or Doc Ock or someone like that. But the whole part with him talking to, Aunt May and all that, I kind of skipped through. So I was, I guess, an impatient reader. When it came to books where the characters looked like me, African-American kids, I really didn't see anything. I didn't see anyone. And I didn't have a Deborah Taylor pulling me aside and saying, hey, you know what? We ordered 10 copies of this book for you and for your friends, or even if you have to sit with me and read a chapter to get me going, and then I would be intrigued. So I think that finding that book for a kid, and even, if it is graphic novels are reading,
Right.
And not I had too many teachers look down at comic books, so, it's not real reading. It will rot your brains, that kind of thing. And it almost made it seem like, okay, well, if they don't want me to read comics and I'm not reading Huckleberry Finn, then I guess I'm just not going to read. And then I really turned to drawing and that kind of stuff. So I was out of the reading picture for quite a while.
I think one of the things that we're better at as librarians and teachers is recognizing all the different ways kids are readers and encouraging that, and not saying if you're not sitting there with a big novel, you're not a reader.
Right.
But I think now we're starting to see books like New Kid win prizes and get recognition. And I think that we're more open to the fact that we're a visual society. And so we want to encourage kids to read. And it takes some work to read a graphic novel. It's not as easy as people who don't read them think. There is some work that has to go on to coordinate the text and and the pictures. So I think you're doing incredible work there. And we're here. We're celebrating the book birthday of Class Act, the sequel to New Kid. It's already received several starred reviews. Did you always plan to give Jordan and his friends another book?
You know what? I had hoped to, because again, when you talk about the African American protagonist, there aren't many that I can name that have made it to that upper echelon of a wimpy kid, a dog man, a Captain Underpants, a Percy Jackson, a Harry Potter. And I didn't think that I could achieve that with one book. So when my agent and I approached HarperCollins and we were talking, they loved New Kid, I really knew then and there that it would take me 3 books to get kids like Jordan and Drew and Liam and Alexandra with her puppets as kind of the household names that I never had as a kid, besides maybe Fat Albert, you know, of kids of color. It just didn't exist at least in the world where I was, it didn't exist. And to have a whole generation of kids growing up on these books the way that my kids grew up with, you know, Wimpy Kid is just amazing. I still have to pinch myself sometimes.
Well, sequels are very important to middle grade readers. They get invested in characters. They the fact that they feel like they know the character propels them through the story. They just want to, it's like a friend. It's like an old friend that they are connecting with. So I think that it's so great that there's going to be that series so that we can see middle grade kids of color doing the things that they do. And I thought was really great about Class Act and New Kid as well, but particularly in Class Act, is how seamlessly you weave serious topics through a humorous coming of age story. I mean, there's lots of humor, but how did you strike that balance? Because we talk about some pretty important serious colorism. We talk about class. We talk about all kinds of issues that kids are coping with, but we often don't see it done in a way that is also fun and enjoyable, an enjoyable read.
Okay, so I'm going to share something different with you that I have not shared on my recent tour, but for some reason, that has always been my niche. So I have self-published for like 100 years, right? The very first book I self-published was Mama's Boys as American Sweet Potato Pie. And with these characters, like I knew that it was a mom raising her 2 teenage sons, and I never really explained where the dad was. And then when I read about how diabetes was running rampant through the Black and Latino communities at the time, well, still, I said, oh, you know, I'm going to have it where the dad passed away due to complications from diabetes. I then approached the American Diabetes Association and asked if, you know, I could do some work with them. And they chose these characters as their spokes characters for their African American program. Awesome. So I took a serious thing about diabetes and health and nutrition and put that in the Mama's Boys. Now, the mom in the strip also owns a bookstore, so I had the whole literacy thing. From there, I remember being approached by the New York Daily News to ask me if I wanted to do Mama's Boys comic strips for their AIDS supplement. So quarterly, and I'm like, how am I going to do a comic strip on AIDS? And I did it, and it was really, really well received. Then from there, like one of the first books that I did was for my friend Margot Candelaria. This is Look Into the Clouds for Daddy, about 3 sisters dealing with the passing of their dad. And, you know, like I said, before I knew it, most of my books had some kind of a major theme to it. You know, it was the loss of a parent, or it was health, nutrition, or literacy. I did a Mama's Boys comic book that I self-published about a girl with leukemia. You know, so by the time I got to do New Kid, I mean, shoot, race and class was easy. You know, when you talk about doing stuff for, you know, organ and tissue donation and teenage pregnancy and truancy. So people just kept approaching me about tackling these things in ways that were accessible and friendly. And so I just never backed down from that. So it's kind of easy at this point.
Well, I think that's really awesome because you were really prepared for this moment, in a lot of ways with all of the work you had done, in a smaller way and self-published. This kind of really set you up here for this particular time. And one of the things that I also noticed about Class Act is that it seems more like an ensemble than the traditional primary characters, secondary characters. And how did you decide to craft the story that way?
Craft a story. I see what you did there. Craft a story.
It was bound to get in there sometime today, Jerry. You know that.
So you know what? I wanted to show, because a lot of times in movies, you see that single dimension storyline that comes to people like us. It's like there's a struggle and there's gangs and there's police brutality, or the books are about slavery or civil rights movement. And again, I always say they're very important books, but I do think that any book that a kid gets and you just see them hugging that book, or telling their friends, hey, have you read it, is an important book. So, I just really wanted to have a book that showed someone like Jordan, who was based on me and my sons, light skin, curly hair, always seen as non-threatening. And now in this one with Class Act, you see Drew, who is taller, dark skin, his natural hair, and then there is Kirk, his friend from around his block. There's Maury, whose dad runs like a Fortune 500 company. So those kind of things, I just felt like I needed to show as many examples as possible. And then when I brought in a character like Alexandra, who wears the puppet on her hand, originally she was just kind of the comic relief. And then, I'm just very sensitive to kids that get teased or laughed at for being quote unquote weird, like the weird girl.
Yeah.
So I wanted to show a backstory of the stuff that she's going through to help kids, see kids like that and accept them and like, hey, what's your story? Come sit and have lunch with us. And before I knew it, it really was this ensemble character, this ensemble cast, with Jordan, Drew, and Liam, in the forefront, but Andy and Alexandra and just a lot of other kids. And then I added more in this one because as I went to different schools, kids would say, Mr. Kraft, how come there's no Muslim character? Or Mr. Kraft, how come there's no kids from India? Or Mr. Kraft? And then I really started to think about, I know how important it was for me to see myself and for kids to say, I want to see myself too. And I added a lot more of that in Class Act.
I think in addition to that great ensemble of kids, I was also struck by how well you depict the adults and the range of adult characters in the books and the roles they play in the lives of kids. I mean, we act sometimes in YA that kids live on an island where there are no adults.
Right.
And I understand why that happens. And sometimes it happens for the through line of the story. But in realistic fiction, most of the time kids have good
Okay, so you're frozen. I see. I don't know if I'm still coming through, but until you unfreeze, I think where you're going is that showing the adults. And one of the things that I realize that, especially as a dad, where if you look at TV commercials, the parents are always like way overdone, big glasses and high water pants, and just doing a lot of like the butt of the jokes. A lot of movies also you see the kids just yelling at the parents. The parents are just kind of like,
Right.
it's almost role reversal,
Yeah.
you know? And I know one of the biggest fears in my life is to reincarnate as a parent in a Disney cartoon, because I know my time is numbered. I'm not making it to the second act, because any parent in a Disney cartoon is, whew, your time is short. And also a lot of the teachers in these books and movies get ridiculed, like say in Ferris Bueller, he'll end up with paint on his head, and by the end of the movie he's this and that happening. Right. And I really didn't want to ridicule adults, because I don't want kids thinking my mom is dumb, my dad is dumb, listen, just because we may not be able to download an app on our phone doesn't mean that there's a lot of stuff that we can't do. And I wanted us to be more as a team, parents, teachers, and kids, as opposed to just all this the kids are the cool ones, the parents are the dumb ones, the teachers are mean, that kind of thing. So it's really important for me to show adults in a positive light as well.
And I think you do it really well. And I mean, there's some adults who make some mistakes, mm-hmm. and who operate under their assumptions. And there are other adults who have a bigger, I love Mr. Pierre, by the way, can I just say?
Oh, good.
So I just thought that was a really nice depiction of someone who had a life experience so different from every other adult, mm-hmm. that was there. But he had something to really share with the young people when they had interactions with him.
Yeah, so, and the kids make mistakes too. Jordan, yes. makes mistakes. Drew makes mistakes. Like Drew has this issue with Liam that even he doesn't really know what's going on, and it takes him a long time to figure it out. Now, I also knew that I'm so thankful again for the teachers and librarians, because I did kind of, give them a little slap on the wrist in New Kid, showing that when you have kids of color, we're not just the same character, and when you do things like, get our names wrong, or get the people wrong. Oh, hi, Mr. Garner. I'm not Coach Rick, I'm Mr. Garner, right. I've been here 14 years, which I've seen personally, that there really is something to kind of like step up your game a little bit and realize like, wow, by the time this kid comes from Washington Heights, like I did, and had to pretend to be cool here, but pretend not to be cool there, and pretend this happened and talk this way here, and then, get past the tough kids on the bus here, you could be exhausted. So, just not come in and just be yelled at because you think that because I'm Black, I don't have a mom and dad at home, so I'm going to teach him some discipline, or I'm going to take him down a notch.
Right.
So I was so like, one of the best things is when teachers and librarians were like, oh, I was that teacher. I'm so sorry. I'm going to reach out to this kid and have a conversation. And that just gave me goosebumps when I hear that I could literally change the way a teacher interacts with the kids. And when you change a teacher, you change the world. Really, you change how the kids are as well.
I think that's an excellent point. And we're getting close to the end of our time to have for our questions. And I want to encourage any of the viewers to submit questions in the chat, and to, we'll make sure that we share those with Jerry. Jerry's gonna do a drawing demonstration in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. So we want to encourage you to stand by for that. And as we're waiting for other folks to put their questions in the chat, I just want to ask you a little bit about your process in terms of balancing between the words and the pictures, and how do you think about that whole process? How do you envision it? Do you envision it visually first? Do you envision it with a script, and that you are then illustrating? What's your process when you're working in this?
Well, so can you see my screen now?
I can.
Can you see the white screen? Okay. So one of the big things that I do is I do figure, it really is hand in hand, And so when I think about something like drawing a page, for example, like if I was saying Jordan and Drew are going out for ice cream, right? So I may kind of sketch out, and even in like Word or InDesign or something like that, I might just type out, hey, Drew, want to get some ice cream, and I'll just have all the words. Sure, I'd love to. Oh, but wait a minute, you're lactose intolerant, aren't you? Oh, blah, blah, blah. But da, da, da. So, and then I can move and edit it. And then from there, I will go right into the actual sketch stage, and then so I'll have Jordan here and he is talking. So I will basically do the entire book like this, and so here's Jordan and here's Drew, and then I'll just decide, okay, well, he's got the word balloon coming here, and then I will, there's a really great book by my comic mentor, Barbara Slate, called You Can Do a Graphic Novel, that if you're a kid or an adult, it just really breaks down a lot of the intricacies of doing this. So I was Barbara's assistant for years, and I worked on a bunch of comics with her, and it has really paid off. So thank you, Barbara Slate. So now, you've got something like that. And then maybe here they are walking to the ice cream parlor, and still talking. And then what I might do is on the second version, I will think of, okay, let me show a kid eating an ice cream, walking from this ice cream parlor, and then you put like a big thing that says ice cream, right? So that's kind of an establishing shot. And then, maybe they both have the ice cream and Jordan is really, really happy. And then, maybe he takes one lick and then the ice cream falls off, and now you've got the big eyes like this, and then that kind of thing. And, if this isn't perfect, which, I mean, it's never perfect, right? It doesn't take, I haven't spent a whole lot of time doing this. You know what I mean? So if I decide, okay, you know what, I need to change this, I can move this around, I can do this, or, like I said, I can just add more stuff to it. I might have a woman, giving her dog ice cream here. Just little funny things. I like to hide so much stuff in the background so that there's no way that you could see everything in New Kid or Class Act on the first go around, there are street signs and there's, stuff like that. And this is kind of how I literally do the entire book. And then I send it to both my agent and my editor. And then we kind of go from there. And then it changes and I'll add and subtract and write and rewrite and draw and redraw.
We've got a few questions.
Okay.
Got a question from Eti Berland. And
hey, I know her.
You know Eti, okay?
I do.
She has a great question here, and it's gonna make everybody really want to run right out and get Class Act. How did you choose which books to reference? In Class Act, and because she said, I love trying to find them all.
One of the things that has been great is like being kind of the new kid in publishing. And I've met some really wonderful people, when you talk about the Kwame Alexanders, who is just always at the top of his game, but always just so warm and embracing. He's been really good to me. I've seen him places and he's given his thing and people there to see him. And he'll be like, oh, hey, Jerry Craft is here. Have you seen him? And he does a book called New Kid. So it's my way of kind of thanking them. The Kwames, the Jacqueline Woodsons, meeting people like Elizabeth Acevedo, who is one of my favorites, Renee Watson. One of my good buddies is Eric Velasquez, who has a cameo in the book as well. I just really like that aspect of it, and then I just really wanted to be like hashtag team graphic novel for this. So, when I was thinking about a way to, because I really wanted Class Act to be better than New Kid, like that was my goal, and I know it's a lofty goal because, how do you top a book that won the Newbery and the Kirkus and the Coretta Scott King, which I'm grateful for, but I was like, how do I make this book better? And just have people like, when you look at it, go, oh my goodness, that is so funny, or I missed that the first time, or, adults that enjoy the book as much as kids do. So that was my goal with this.
I think you really, really hit it. I think there was so much more to experience, and I think you did a phenomenal job with that. We also have a question from Kim Mccoy-Parker, and she wants to know, how long does it take you to write your books? And I think she's representing fifth graders at 4 Mile.
Oh, okay. So I started jotting down notes for New Kid in 2014. I started jotting down the notes, and then I started really working on it in like 2015, 2016, just kind of like the sketch ideas that I showed you. But then when I sold it to HarperCollins in January of 2017, that was when it was on, it was like full. And what I did then was I worked on it literally every day from January 2017 until February 2018. So it took me, I would say, about 13 months of 18-hour days to get it done. And it was a blessing and a curse, because once it got so popular, my wonderful friends at HarperCollins like, hey, instead of 13 months, can you do the sequel in 3 weeks? That kind of thing. I mean, they gave a little bit more than 3 weeks, but so the only good thing about the quarantine is that I had nothing to do but work on the book. So I worked on it again, 18, 19-hour days.
Wow.
And then I finished it. I literally finished this, I think, in July of this year. And everyone just went double time to make sure that, it was out for its launch in October, yesterday.
Well, I think that was such a phenomenal kind of thing, because I think New Kid opened so many eyes, and if people wanted to keep getting more, and they knew that you brought something really special to the table. Another question that we have is from CJ Kirkland. What was the first book you ever read? I know you said you were a reluctant reader, but do you remember when there was a book that you read that maybe changed your idea about reading?
Yeah, it was the weirdest thing. The first, and I'm going to say big boy book, meaning, substantial pages. I think it was like 11th grade at Fieldston in Riverdale, and I read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And it was the first book that I read that I finished that was like 400 pages and that I actually enjoyed. And I I patted myself on the back because I just didn't think that that was ever going to be me. And I think the weird thing with that was that, you know, having not had mirrors, it's so funny that the first kid that I consider a mirror was a, you know, kid growing up in England in like the 1800s named Pip, you know? And so I found like I had more in common with him than I did, you know, unfortunately, with the runaway slave books and that kind of thing. So even though he was British, I was like, oh, I actually like he had great expectations. Like this was a kid that wanted to make his life better, and he did some social climbing, and he was a gentleman. And I had never seen Black kids do that. You know, a lot of times we're just so, you know, the big thing is just surviving to the end of the book that there's not even a thing about elevating or changing your life station or things like that. So that really did have a profound impact on me.
And Emma Harper wants to know, what was the hardest part of the writing process for you?
The hardest part of the writing process back then was, you know, when you don't think of yourself as a reader, it's really hard to ever imagine yourself as a writer. So I didn't think I was a writer, you know. And what's so funny about, you know, growing up to win the Newbery is I never thought I would read a 200-page book, you know. So I really never thought I would ever write a 200-page book. And, you know, one of the things when I had my two sons, I wanted them to be readers. I wanted them to see what I had missed. So I remember every day reading them, you know, at bedtime, every day reading them, you know, from Dr. Seuss to then they graduated to the Captain Underpants. And then, you know, we did some classics, you know, the Wizard of Oz's and things like that. And then one day I started seeing these books that had these two little shiny round things on it, you know, like Bud Not Buddy and Holes, and I didn't know what those were, but I knew that it meant that we were in for a good book. And again, little did I know that I one day New Kid would be up there with Bud Not Buddy as having won the only other book to win Coretta Scott King and the Newbery Medal. And again, that's like, wow, that was some foreshadowing.
Jerry, I'll let you in on a little thing. I was chair of Coretta Scott King that year.
Oh, really? For Bud Not Buddy?
Bud Not Buddy. I was chair of the jury. So when I hear people make that connection, I always gives me a nice little memory there.
Yeah, and the memory that I had was, you know, was reading that to my sons before they went to bed. And again, seeing a African-American kid, like I didn't have a kid like him. I love Buddy, you know? Yeah. So, yeah.
Do you think of class act of having, and this is from Lynne Sommer, of having a main idea or a theme that you were really trying to explore?
You know, one of the things is finding yourself and treating yourself as well as you treat other people. You know, some people are so into like, oh, that's the cool kid, or that's the cheerleader, or that's a this, or that's a that. And they just take whatever comes to them.
Right.
You know, right. And, you know, that's why the Alexandra character became such an important character, because it's like, well, you know, she, whether you like her or not, she wants to wear a puppet, so she walks around with a puppet, you know, and people are like, wow, okay. And Drew kind of thinks of that and like, oh, okay, she's not afraid of what people think. So in a lot of ways, she's one of the bravest kids in the school, because again, she does what she wants to do.
That's a really good point. Jennifer Rogers has a question, which which reminds me that I wanted to remind our viewers that your books, New Kid, Class Act, and earlier titles are available at bn.com. And so, because she asked, how many books do you have? So in addition to New Kid and Class Act, there's some other titles that that you have available on bn.com.
Yeah, of the ones on BN, I have the Offenders, which is 5 kids who are kind of bullies of their school. They get zapped, they get superpowers, but instead of looking like Spider-Man or Black Panther, someone like that, they end up looking like the kids that they pick on. So one gains like 50 pounds and one gets tiny and one gets super thin and things like that. And I actually wrote that with my 2 sons when they were in middle school. So I think I captured a lot of, the nuances there. And that was, a prose book that was 200 pages that, again, like I said, I just never thought that I would ever read or write. And then the other is Mama's Boys. Lean over real quick. Mama's Boys in Living Color, which is the graphic novel that I did so that I could practice doing New Kid, because again, I didn't know I could do a 250-page book. I saw Raina Telgemeier and so just do amazing jobs. Like, can I do a book that big? And so I figured if I did a 90-page graphic novel, that eventually I could do a 250-page book. It just may take 3 times as long. But yep, they're all on bn.com 24/7.
Great. Erin Green Silveira, she asked, did you think about making a next book like New Kid 2? And also, this gives us a great chance to ask if you've thought about the direction for the 3rd one.
I definitely do have an idea for book 3. As of now, I'm only committed to do 3 books in the series. So I do have an idea already. And I couldn't help it. I was on Goodreads yesterday reading some comments from people on Class Act. It's like, only thing is I wish he had added this. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So I'll make sure to put that in the 3rd book. So the 3rd book, this Class Act goes from September through April. And then the next book, Yet Untitled, will go from April through June. But I already have my story arc now, and I'm just kind of going back in and figuring out, which character is going to be in there and who's going to take the center stage and that kind of stuff. But I'm really looking forward to it, even though it's a lot of work.
We've got a few more questions we're going to try to get through in the next few minutes.
Okay.
Amy Reagan asks, what made you want to start writing? From Miss Reagan's 5th grade class at Bowles Elementary.
I think the biggest thing is that I didn't see the books that I wanted. And, there's that, I forgot who said, and I just saw that quote.
Toni Morrison.
Toni Morrison, thank you.
Toni Morrison. Mm-hmm.
And so that I don't butcher the quote, do you know it better than I do?
I can't say I won't butcher it, but I think it's, if the book that you want to read is not out there, you have to write it.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, and just again, hashtag nobody dies. There's no, real awful stuff that I just want kids to have fun. And I wanted, again, so with my sons, they had, for their birthdays, no one ever thought twice about giving them, Harry Potter or Percy Jackson or whatever, with white protagonists. But rarely does that go the other way around, where you see, kids who aren't Black reading Black books, with Black protagonists. And I really wanted to cross over in that sense. I mean, I definitely wanted a book that celebrated, African-American kids. And, I've had moms say that they have cried because their kid has read the book 5 times and their kid has cried because he's never seen himself in a book like this before. And that is just really special to me. But I also want other kids, because if you're never around African-American kids or adults or whomever, and all you see is TV, you have a really distorted image of, what again, that just one-dimensional kind of, what you think of us, and I just wanted to show other things.
I think you also answered, because Ayana Mitchell also had a similar kind of question about what inspired you to write that. I also have one here from Jennifer McGill, who's with a class of 7th graders from Columbia, South Carolina. Do you see a book in the future with a female protagonist?
So you know what? I know that sometimes when you see books, it's like that wasn't your place to do that. So I thought about that, and even like, a runoff with Alexandra, the puppet girl, but I don't want to be the guy that pretends like he knows what it was like to be a little girl, because I don't. Because being a little girl is very different than being a little boy. And if I thought I could pull it off, I would consider it. But again, I don't want to be that, like, because I know sometimes as an African-American boy growing up, or even older, seeing books that weren't done by African-American authors, they're like, well, do they really know what it's like? Or should they have kind of stayed in their lane? So maybe I'm kind of put myself in a box of staying in the lane and just do what I do well. But I don't know. I need some fan feedback on that, how you'd feel if I did a book that had a girl. Because I do have like 2 ideas, but you have to let me know if you're going to be mad at me or not.
We had someone who asked about your drawing, and that was kind of a unique question. Who or what taught you to draw so well? And were you self-taught, or did you go to art school?
So I am Jordan Banks in the sense where my mom and dad did not let me go to art school because they thought that I'd be living in their basement their whole life, or my whole life, because they had only heard the term starving artist. And, so I showed them. I moved out of their basement 3 weeks ago, so there. But the biggest thing is I look and I just kind of look at shapes, I look at round shapes that then turn into, like a Hershey's Kiss kind of thing. And then I have like, a letter U, and then I have like another U, and then I have, another kind of shape like this. And I break stuff into shapes that my brain is like, oh yeah, we can do that. That's easy, and I do something like that and then bring it in. And then before you know it, there's actually a real shape to it, so that when you go back in and erase, gotta make that white. So a lot of this kind of stuff is self-taught, in the sense where it's just like, okay, let me see how I can do that and not be frustrated, because a lot of kids put so much pressure on themselves that they never finish the drawing, because they make one mistake and they're like, oh, and they rip it, and they have those nasty erasers that just kind of rip through everything and rip the paper. And I always enjoy it. Like, even when I'm on deadline, I enjoy this so much, but I also give myself permission to make mistakes.
Mary Savage says that, and she mentioned that you touched on this again earlier, but would you emphasize of what you would say to people who say that graphic novels are not real books?
So I know that when I wrote The Offenders, that's a prose book. So it's a 250-page prose book. And I know that when I did New Kid, I put the same nuances and character design and story arc and everything that I did when I did some of my prose books, you know? And one of my favorite stories is a dad comes into a bookstore, and the bookstore owner told me this. Dad comes into the bookstore, and the kid is like, "Oh, Dad, can I get a graphic novel?" And he's like, "No, you need to get a real book." And the bookstore owner goes, "Well, you know, a graphic novel just won the coveted Newbery Prize last week." And Dad's like, "Oh, all right. Well, in that case, get whatever you want." You know, and that is such an honor to have, you know, to be the kid that they said would, you know, that comics would rot my brain, to being the kid who, it's almost Star Wars, like, you know, bringing like, man, I can't believe I'm missing the Star Wars thing, but bringing something to the Force, like leveling it out, you know, like it all comes back. And it's like that I'm kind of the guy that like wins this big medal, and in a lot of ways validates the thing that I was told could never be validated for not being real reading.
I think that's a really important point, and why that I'm so glad that New Kid got the recognition that it did, because I think it opens the door for other folks to see how important these titles, this format is for young people. How do you feel about LGBT representations in books? Do you think it's good or bad for kids to read about characters who are LGBT?
I mean, but they're kids, you know, like the characters are kids. So in the same way that you need to see another level of African American characters, you need to see other kids too. And I think it all starts from reading and experiencing and being a little bit more open-minded. You know, like when you think, like, so in my lifetime, my father got in trouble for drinking out of a white water fountain, right? So this is my dad. So I'm one generation removed from that, you know, where African Americans couldn't vote. Before that, women couldn't vote, you know. So I don't want to be that person that 20 years from now is like, oh, I said that, you know, the LGBTQ community couldn't be represented in books and that, because times change. And I think that we're being more empathetic and embracing, you know, and especially like now that, you know, with Black Lives Matter, that people for the first time who never thought that things like racism actually existed, you know, when I hear stories of kids who are transitioning, being ostracized or beaten or bullied, you know, they're still kids,
Yeah.
you know? And it's just like you know, it's like, oh, well, it's okay because he's Black. No, that's kind of the same thing, you know? So it doesn't, like, me being Black doesn't affect you or anyone who's watching, you know, but it affects me, you know, because how I may be watched going into stores or being pulled over, which still happens to me. So the last thing that I would ever do is get to this level and then go, oh yeah, well, now that I'm safe, I'm gonna, you know, wipe my hands and everyone else has to fend for themselves. You know,
Right,
now I personally wouldn't write that story because I don't know it, you know, and I don't want to do like a TV story, just like, you know, a lot of books sometimes written by white authors, like, oh, and his name is Jamal and he lives in the projects and his dad's in jail and his mom works at 9 jobs because I grew up, and when I was a kid, I watched Good Times. So now I think I know what it's like to be African American.
right, right. That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
And our last question is, and it's a great one to end on, any advice for students who want to be authors and artists, or authors and artists?
Okay, so one is, you there's great videos on YouTube for drawing. Again, I highly recommend You Can Do a Graphic Novel by Barbara Slate. And read and see different things. Like I see more and more things that are kind of out of the box. So if you look at Octopus Stew by Eric Velasquez, as a picture book, totally different. Like I really, really, really love it. When you see books by Kwame and Jason Reynolds, Tristan Strong is an excellent book. And those kind of things, I think as you read, you kind of get a sense of what you like. And if you haven't seen that story, your story, don't be afraid to write it. It doesn't always have to be, I'm going to do a manga story about some culture I know nothing about. I think that, whether it's Wimpy Kid or a Nick Stone book, Elizabeth Acevedo book, that there's so many different stories. And it's so funny that the most successful book I've ever done is the one loosely based on my life and my kids' lives, as opposed to, trying to write the next Star Wars or something like that. So just be patient. Don't forget, you write it, you can rewrite it. It's not going to be perfect. I have stacks of pages that I went through that I had to rewrite and write again.
Great advice. And once again, we want to remind everyone that Jerry's books, New Kid, Class Act, and 2 of his earlier titles are available at bn.com. And I just want to thank you, Jerry, for just a really stimulating conversation. And I feel like I learned so much. I'm going to go back and reread Class Act because it's nothing like talking to the author and then figuring out, oh, I need to go back. And I'll look for some of those things that you snuck in there.
Oh yeah, there's a lot
that I can enjoy again. So thanks a million for great conversation. And many thanks to all the folks at BNN for putting us together and giving us this opportunity.
Yep. Thank you, Barnes & Noble. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, other teachers.